Welcome to The Center, a show centered around women and girls who have experienced domestic abuse and trauma. The show provides tools and resources to help women and girls reach their highest potential. My name is Veronique George, and I will serve as your host today. I am honored to have co-host Shayla Hernan Edmonds with us today.
Hi, Veronique. Welcome to The Center, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm a creative entrepreneur and wellness practitioner, and I'm grateful to you for being in this space with us. I'm also super excited to introduce to you our guest for today. Dr. Shawn Ricks is an associate professor and department chair in leadership and educational studies at Appalachian State University. She's also a licensed clinical mental health counselor and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ricks.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Dr. Ricks, as a Black scholar and licensed therapist with more than 20 years of work and research, what informs and inspires your work, and what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, those are large questions. I think what informs my work first and foremost is, I am a Black woman. And so, born from a Black woman who was born from a Black woman. So, watching my aunties, my grandmother, my mother, just watching women for so long. I also started my academic career at an HBCU. And so I got to spend a lot of time, watching and observing and participating. And so what has informed my work primarily has been the observations of, exhaustion and fatigue and, seeing the same narrative across so many spaces. So what I hope to do, it's like, just little ripple effects. Certainly don't think I have the cure for anything, but I'm hoping that little by little, by continuing to have conversations and dialogues, that women will slowly learn what they need and how they can shift, their narrative, shift their behavior. And in doing that, kind of break some generational trauma that might be in place and kind of inform the next new group kind of coming.
Thank you, Dr. Ricks. What's coming to mind now, thinking about members of our audience, women and girls who may have experienced some form of trauma, and also thinking about how mental health, there's a stigma associated with it in many communities, especially the Black community. So how do you work to break down those barriers and stigmas and encourage Black women to seek mental health support?
It's a great question. We are probably in the best time I've ever seen for mental health awareness. I think a lot of that had to do with COVID. COVID really, I think, sat people down. And one of the things we know about stillness, it's restorative, it's rejuvenating, but it's also going to bring what needs to come up. And so I think as people were trying to deal with not being so busy, they realized they had some stuff perhaps that they wanted to unpack. So this new generation, I give them all the credit for, they will tell you in line at the market who their therapist is, what their therapist told them to do. Girl, you need to see a therapist. Like it used to be so closeted, but now it's like everybody's like, girl, who's your therapist? Really? So there's been a shift. Now there's still, I think, a stigma in my generation. It's not as, and I think my mother's generation is not quite as prevalent. But the other thing that I'm loving too is this idea that we can shift what trauma, the definition of trauma, and that's part of my goal in some of my work as well. Peter Levine has a quote that says, "Trauma is trauma, no matter what it is." And so I'm really trying to get people to understand that, living in under-resourced communities is traumatic. Growing up in a Black body in a predominantly white world or country is traumatic. A lot of daily things can be traumatic. So.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I think that there's a lot that we don't believe is trauma because we've had such a limited idea of what it is.
Dr. Ricks, in your paper, Normalized Chaos, Black feminism, womanism, and the redefinition of trauma and healing. You talk about how our narratives of trauma and resiliency can impede our healing. Would you define normalized chaos for our audience and share some insights on how we can begin to recognize and interrupt these narratives?
Sure. So this is a paper I wrote after I went into private practice, in particular because I kept seeing women who were coming in, and as they described what they were doing, it was way outside of what I would consider kind of typical, but they had normalized it, right? Like I get up at 4:30, then I go across town, I get my dad ready, I come back, I do this, then I go to school, then I go to work. And I was like, that's a lot, boo. But because they had normalized it, right, it became kind of their daily kind of chaos, right? And as they did that, they no longer saw it as problematic. It was just how they were, right? So for me, what's fed into this as I was thinking about it was a couple of things. One, this narrative about what it means to be a strong Black woman, or the superwoman. And there's a lot of research that talks about the myth of the strong Black woman, the myth of the superwoman, right? And how we have to instead start realizing that actually we are just, human, and strength looks a myriad of ways, right? Um, the other part of that was kind of, this idea that we weren't talking about mental health and depression as much during the time. The interesting piece around depression as it shows up in particular for Black women is that it doesn't present the same as it does for mainstream populations. And so oftentimes we are undiagnosed or underdiagnosed when going in, right? Or we don't mention it. So one of my favorite things, even now, as I still see clients, is when we're like touching base, getting ready to start a session, and people, I'm like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good. How you doing? I'm good. I'm good, right? So we've gotten to this default behavior. So I noticed that even when people started seeing clinicians, I think sometimes we don't recognize what depression or anxiety might look like for us, because again, it's become just part of our daily thing. Like I'm always supposed to be exhausted, right? I'm always supposed to be a little less thrilled than normal with life, perhaps, or whatever it is, right? And so since we're not typically laying in the bed all day crying, which is what we think depression is, right? Like I can't get out of bed, or, like I had to get out of bed. I had 3 kids. I had to get out of bed, but I wasn't always fully functioning, right? So it's learning that even within that, what is that part? I mean, and so I was really, really interested in that. And the last part again of this normalized chaos was that there was just such a narrow view of what it meant to be traumatized again. So we end up engaging in like these unhealthy behaviors, self-defeating behaviors. And the interesting thing physiologically with this, I won't go too far in the weeds, is once you normalize it, I mean, if you think about it as a thermostat in your house, if you have a range for a temperature like 78 to 82 or something, and you come in and I've snuck that sucker down to 76, you're not really gonna like notice it so much. But let's say I put it up to 60, because I mean, down to 60. I like it cold, let's say. 65, 60 was extreme. I can be extreme. But anyway, let's say it's 65. Or I marry a person who likes it colder than I do. Over time, your whole body will adjust, right? And that will become like the norm. I get used to that temperature. It's not that that's what my norm was or my desire, but we get used to it. So the normalizing of these lives that are, like, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe them really. But that level of busyness, that level of toxicity, it's just too much.
Whew, I just need to take a deep breath after that. It's just too much. Dr. X, thank you for helping us to understand how we normalize chaos. As someone who navigates high functioning anxiety. Your words resonated with me, but I know that there are a lot of people in our audience who either know that about themselves or maybe they don't. So as we close our conversation today, what else would you like for our audience to take away from our conversation or know about being well?
Wellness is a daily practice. I would say, just like, we take care of our oral hygiene, et cetera, and this is something I've seen with clients that they're exhausted of like doing the work, right? Which is really basically just tuning into their emotions, all that stuff. But I brush my teeth, every day, sometimes several times a day, because I value having them in my mouth. So, with our mental wellness too, it isn't about it's a work or it's a chore. It's the valuing, that I am worth the investment of time, resources, whatever it takes. So mental wellness is daily, is one thing that I kind of want to make sure I emphasize to people. The other thing I would really say is please be gentle with yourself, right? So this kind of mindful self-compassion, the mindfulness is great because it brings us to the moment, but the self-compassion, that can take care of a multitude of things that you're dealing with in and of itself. If you never saw a therapist and just started talking to yourself in a more kinder, gentler way, allowing yourself to be human and allow yourself to be human fully, then you would start coming back home to yourself. And that in and of itself would be healing.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ricks. We really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.